The Indian Upanishads. You and the universe are one. In the 7th or 6th century BC, a number of forest philosophers from India wrote a number of texts called the Upanishads. And these texts describe debates and teachings about the workings of the mind that appear remarkably modern. For instance, they are the first texts to describe two stages of sleep, namely dream and deep dreamless sleep. And they also discovered that our thoughts and feelings seem to come out of nowhere. Or as we would say today, they seem to bubble up from the unconscious. Their next step was to identify the self, or Atman in Sanskrit, not with the ego as happened in the West, but instead with this unknowable origin of our thoughts. That is again the unconscious. And since this self is equally unknowable in all beings, they then came to believe in the underlying unity of all beings. And going still further, since both the self or Atman and the essence of the universe, Brahman, are equally unknowable, they even concluded that the self is one with the universe. Famously, this concept was explained by the teacher Uddalaka to his son Swetaketu. Uddalaka asked his son to pick up a seed from a large tree and then to open it. And when the boy discovered nothing inside, the father concluded that the essence of the tree could not be perceived, yet it has the power to bring forth an entire tree. And more fundamentally, that his son in his essence was equal to this same mystery. You are that, said the father, Tat Svam Asi. Then we'll discuss how the writers of the Upanishads developed these ideas, which in fact is quite a tough nut to crack. For today, their idea that all is one is often associated with a deep state of meditation, in which one's sense of self loosens and one feels at one with the universe. And as the 60s have taught us, this state can also be induced through drugs such as LSD. Yet strangely, meditation had not yet developed at this time, and the texts do not directly connect drugs to their discoveries. So what did they do? Well, I will attempt to figure out what is going on here as far as is possible, sticking close to the actual evidence. So we have a lot to get to. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself. Let's start. As said before, the Indian philosophers of the Upanishad identified the self or Atman with the unconscious. That is, that mental space inside of us from which our thoughts and feelings arise. And they soon figured out that this unconscious could not be described, since, as the word implies, it is beyond the senses. But then, when investigating Brahman, that is, the fundamental essence of the universe, they found at its root the same indescribable mystery that they had found when studying the self or Atman. Both the essence of the self and the universe, they said, were equally unknowable. And from this observation they made the leap that Atman and Brahman were equal. And this became the most important conclusion of the Upanishads. We read, "The Atman is the Brahman. That is the teaching." And this connection between Atman and Brahman, they claimed, was secret knowledge or Upanishad that was hidden from ordinary people. This teaching that Brahman and Atman are equal is beautifully explained by the sage Uddalaka, who was a personal philosopher of a local king and later also became a renouncer living in the forest. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we read how he taught his son Swetaketu. And this interaction, by the way, is my favorite exchange in all of the Upanishads. In fact, perhaps in all of Indian philosophy. It is beautiful. We read, There was a boy named Svetaketu, and his father said to him, Svetaketu, go live as a seeker of Brahman. And having become a pupil at 12 and having studied all the Vedas, he returned home at 24, proud, conceited, thinking of himself well-schooled. But then his father said to him, Svetaketu, since you are proud and conceited, dear boy, and you consider yourself learned, did you ask your teachers for that instruction by which that which is not heard becomes heard, that which is not thought becomes thought, and that which is not known becomes known? But in what manner, sir, is this teaching? Asked the boy. And the father responded, Just as from a single lump of clay, dear boy, one would know just about everything made from clay, the difference being a mere verbal distinction, a name, but the reality is only clay. And just as from a single nail scissor, dear boy, one would know all about iron objects, the difference being a mere verbal distinction, a name, the reality is only iron. And this is the teaching, dear boy. And the boy responded, Indeed, those worthy men did not know this, for if they had known it, why did they not tell me? Please, sir, tell it to me. O blessed one, instruct me further. Certainly, dear boy, the father replied. Bring a fig from over there, said the father. Here it is, sir. Now divide it. It is divided, sir. Now what do you see there? These rather small seeds, sir. Divide one. It is divided, sir. What do you see? Nothing, sir, said the boy. And then the father responded, Dear boy, that finest essence, which you do not perceive, from this very essence, dear boy, that great fig tree arises. Believe me, dear boy, that which is the finest essence, the whole universe has that as itself, or Atman. That is reality. That is the self. And you, Svetaketu, are that. And that here written with a capital T, referring to that ultimate essence of the universe and the self. And then we continue, O blessed one, instruct me further. Certainly, dear boy. Place this salt in water, and in the morning come back to me. And he did exactly so. And then the father said to him, The salt that you put in the water last night, bring it hither. But while he was grasping for the salt, he couldn't find it, since it had completely dissolved. Then the father said, Take a sip from the edge of it. What is there? Salt, said the boy. And now take a sip from the middle. What is there? Salt, said the boy. Now take a sip from the far edge. What is there? Salt. Now set it aside and come to me. And the boy did exactly that, saying, It is always the same. It's always salt. And the father then replied, Being is indeed truly here, dear boy, but you do not perceive it here. That which is the finest essence, the whole universe has that as itself. That is reality. That is the self. And you, Svetaketu, are that. And then comes the following. Since the first philosophers believed that all human beings were in essence equal to the universe itself, it also followed that our feeling of separateness from each other must be an illusion or maya. And this illusion must be brought on by our ignorance. In this vein, Uddalaka concluded that in reality, one Atman could not be distinguished from another, just as two rivers fusing into the same sea can no longer say, I am this river and I am that river. Again, Uddalaka always has the best metaphors. And in later Zen Buddhism, this idea is often described by comparing the mind to the surface of a pond. When wind blows across the surface, the reflection of the pond is broken into many fragments. However, if the wind ceases and the surface becomes still, the reflection turns into perfect unity. And the same will happen to the world, the Zen Buddhists believed, when the mind becomes perfectly still. And then all Atman will appear as one. Curiously, this lesson that the self is equal to the essence of the entire universe can be gained through meditation. And in fact, MRI research has confirmed that experienced meditators can readily enter a state in which their sense of self is weakened, giving them a sense of becoming one with the environment. For there is this area in the brain that helps us distinguish between our own body and the environment, and this part gets weakened through meditation. And this research seems to match beautifully with the description in these early Upanishads. And as a result, for a long time, I also assumed that this conclusion was reached through meditation. Yet, the writers of the early Upanishads do not seem to have been aware of meditation. That would come a century or two later, for the later Upanishads do describe them. So then the question remains, where did the philosophers of the Upanishads got their knowledge from? Or at least where did they claim they got their knowledge from? In the much older Vedas, the most ancient Hindu scripts, this is clearly specified. Here poet priests believed they got their answers directly from the gods, after consuming an hallucinogen known as soma, and this allowed them to directly hear or shruti the gods. And the Upanishads do present themselves as a philosophical elaboration of the Vedas. For instance, they regularly link up their teachings to the ancient rituals of the Vedas. But this is often done in a contrived way. And then the Upanishads go way beyond the original texts. In fact, reading the text yourself, you will definitely find that the Vedas barely inform their exploration of the mind. So how did they do it? Well, when their attainment of wisdom is described, the Upanishads used verbs such as to examine and to seek. And in the previous lecture, we have also seen that they went through a process called neti-neti, or not this, not that, in which they got to an essence of a concept by describing what the concept was not. For instance, they concluded that the self was not equal to hearing, not equal to vision, not thinking, not feeling, etc., leaving finally only the unknowable mystery that we would now term the unconscious. And these are quite rational methods. But how did they get from here to their conclusion of the unity of all things? Let's look some further. The texts do sometimes speak of ascetic practices, for which they use the term tapas, which in Vedic times was associated with the internal heat that was felt by priests during rituals involving soma. And tapas was later identified as the heat produced during meditation. But in the early Upanishads, it seems to refer to austerity practices, not yet meditation. And these practices seem to include food and sleep deprivation. We're not sure. Very little is told about these practices. And also the Upanishads rarely link tapas to their discoveries. There is an exception, by the way. At one point we do read that Brahman is what the Brahmins or the priests seek to know by means of Vedic recitation, sacrifice, gift-giving, austerity or tapas, and fasting. And in a later Upanishad we read, seek to perceive Brahman by means of austerity or tapas. So tapas was definitely part of the answer, but it is strange that they didn't elaborate on how this was done if this was so important. And on top of all this, there's also a paragraph that denies the importance of tapas. We read in one Upanishad that those who dwell in the forest and believe that austerity or tapas is faith will go to Brahma, the god associated with Brahman after death. Yet in the other early Upanishad, we find exactly the same text, with only a few words changed. And now we read that those who believe that truth is faith go to Brahma. And then austerity or tapas is actually mentioned as an insufficient method. Now truth or intellectual understanding was deemed more essential. So it remains a bit of an enigma. A final key might be their description of sleep, which they did refer to many times. As said before, the forest philosophers recognized two stages of sleep: the more superficial sleep in which we dream, and a deeper dreamless sleep. And in this second stage, it was thought, we experience the unity of Atman directly. For according to Yajnavalkya, a famous sage from the Upanishads, we are not conscious during dreamless sleep. So in this stage there is, quote, no second reality that our mind can see as something distinct and separate from itself. Instead there is only the unity of Atman, which he equated with the world of Brahman. And he described this as a state of pure bliss. The philosopher king Ajatasattu expanded on this theory. He once offered a Brahmin from the Gargya family 1,000 cows for telling him about Brahman. Gargya first claimed that Brahman is equal to the sun, but the king was not satisfied with this answer. Then he tried the moon, lightning, wind, fire and so on, until he finally fell silent. And then the king stepped in and told him there was more to Brahman. Upon hearing this, Gargya asked to be a student. And as a demonstration, the king then approached a sleeping man and woke him up, and then he asked Gargya, when this man was asleep here, where was that person consisting of perception, and where did he return? But Gargya did not know the answer. The king then taught that when we dream, the cognitive powers, which are normally distributed throughout the body, are gathered in a cavity in the heart. That was what they believed at the time. And this cavity was conceived of as a cosmic space in which people travel during their dreams. It is the world of dream. And during deep dreamless sleep, he added, Atman leaves the heart through thousands of veins and then enters the pericardium, the sac surrounding the heart. And in this place, he said, the self is oblivious to everything. We read, when a man sleeps, the person who consists of understanding rests in the space within the heart. And when that person has absorbed the senses, that is, the senses that normally aim outward to the external world, which are now directed to the inner world, to the world of dream, one is said to be asleep. The breath is absorbed, we breathe slower, the voice and the faculties of eye, ear and intellect are absorbed, and when a man thus sleeps, the whole world is his. He becomes a Maharaja or king, as it were. He becomes a great Brahmin, as it were. For just as a Maharaja, taking with him his people, moves around in his own country as he pleases, so this person asleep, taking with him his senses, moves around in his own body as he pleases. That is, in the world of dream. But when he is in deep, dreamless sleep, he knows nothing at all. He is at rest throughout his body, having crept out of the space within the heart through 72,000 veins, which lead from the heart into the pericardium. He slips out of the heart through these veins and rests within the pericardium. He rests there, oblivious to everything. And as a spider comes out along its thread, or as sparks pour from a fire, even so from Atman come forth all the senses, the worlds, the gods and all beings. And the secret name thereof, or Upanishad, is the reality of reality, since the self is the reality behind the senses. And this, I think, is how far we can trace back their reasoning. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to know more about Indian philosophy or any other topic from world history, read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.